Hello everyone, welcome to this lesson. So up to this point you learned how to set up Excel and VBA, and you also learned the two types of programs that you can write. You can either write a function or you can either write a subroutine. Now in this lesson we're going to work on the basic fundamentals of actually programming in VBA, or actually programming in general. Now we're going to learn 5 things. We're going to learn the 3 structures of programming. Then we're going to introduce the 2 types of repetition structures commonly used in programming. Then we're going to go through the difference between the 2 types, when to know which one to use. We're going to learn how to write a subroutine to sum 10 numbers using one of those loops, and also to display the sum under the column. And also we're going to learn how to call numbers from the Excel sheet. So not only are we going to learn the repetition loop, but we're going to learn how to communicate between the VBA program and the spreadsheet by either displaying numbers on the spreadsheet or calling numbers from the spreadsheet inside of VBA. Also, finally, we're going to compare our simple sum code with Excel's inbuilt sum function, just for validation and also to introduce the sum function in Excel. So let's begin. So what are the 3 structures of programming? Well, they are the sequence structure, the repetition structure, and the decision structure. So what is the sequence structure? Well, it's very simple, that things in programming are done in order. So let's take the example that we have on the right here. When we wrote this function, we defined what x is, then what y is, then we went down into this function and we calculated what f is. But let's assume we took x and y and we put it down here. What would happen? Well, the code would give us an error because it goes in order. It goes to f and it says, okay, f is equal to x plus 1 multiplied by y divided by y squared. But x and y are not defined. They have absolutely no values to them. So f cannot be calculated because x and y were defined after f, where they were supposed to be defined before f. So in programming, things are done in sequence. So that's the first structure. The second one is repetition. Sometimes in your program, there are certain functions that are being repeated. For example, sometimes you want to repeat the action of addition. You take one number, then you add it to the next number, they add to the third, fourth, fifth. So the action that you're repeating here is the action of addition. So you would use a loop to make this very efficient. Sometimes, since this is a numerical methods course, the thing that we will be repeating often is that we will calculate a approximation. Then we will calculate a better approximation. Then we're going to loop in it again and calculate a better approximation, and so on. So that is the action that we are repeating, the calculation of a better approximation. The third type of structure is a decision structure. Sometimes in your code you need to make a decision. If something happens, do this, else do something else. So that's the third. So in any programming, whether it's VBA programming or any type of programming language, you will always find these three structures: sequence, repetition, and decision making. So what are the 2 types of repetition structures? Well, you have the for next and you have the do while loops. Now, both of them do the same thing. They loop and they repeat a certain action. But sometimes when you're doing an action, you know how many times you need to loop. So for instance, if I'm summing 10 numbers, I know I need to loop 10 times to add each number to the next. But sometimes you don't know how many times you need to loop or how many times you need an action to be performed, but you know the criteria that needs to be met. And that's basically what we're going to be doing in numerical methods. Sometimes when we're calculating the approximate, this is the action that we're repeating, we don't know whether or not we need to loop 10 times, 100 times, or 1,000 times to get the desired outcome, but we have a criteria. We know that we need to have the error to be below, say, 0.1%. We don't know how many loops will that be, 10, 100, 1,000, but we know just loop until we get to an error below 0.1%. So the 2 types are the for next loop. So if you know the number of loops that you need to do, go ahead and go with the for next loop. If you don't know how many loops that you have, but you know a criteria that you need to meet, for instance, when we're approximating, we need to be below a certain error, that is your criteria, go with the do while loop. So let's go ahead and actually write a very simple subroutine to sum these 10 numbers that we have here and display the sum down here. And we're going to use the for next loop. So in this lesson, we're going to introduce the for next loop. So let's go ahead and create a new module, and I'm gonna just call it maybe sum1. And first we're gonna say sub sum1, and we're gonna press enter. So now we created our subroutine. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to define the initial statement for the for next loop. So it's very simple. It's for I is equal to 1, 2, and the number of loops that I need to loop. So in this case, since I'm summing 10 numbers, I already know I need to loop 10 times. So in this case, we know how many times we need to loop. 1 to 10, then we press enter, and the closing statement of the loop is next I. So now I actually prepared my loop. This is my loop. So what are the actions or action that I need to repeat? Well, in this case, I need to repeat the action of a sum. So I'm going to write the code, then I'm going to explain it. So basically, is sum equal to sum plus cells, and here I have 17 plus, or 16 plus I, and we have the second column. And I'm going to initialize my sum here to be equal to 0. So let's see what's happening here. Now, the first thing I want to explain here, that anything that you introduce, like in this case the variable sum, I need to initialize it. So here I'm going to say my sum initially is equal to 0. Then before I manipulate it and change it to add all of these numbers, I just want it to start at 0. So anything that you introduce into your code, you have to initialize. What is the first number that you want it to start at? 0, 1. Sometimes it will be different, and we're going to use different initializing numbers as this course progresses. Another thing that I want to introduce is the cells keyword. Now, this cells keyword is the way we're going to communicate between the VBA code and the spreadsheet. So right now I'm saying, I'm calling the cells 16 plus I. So let's assume I is equal to 1. So 17 and 2. So what is 17 and 2? 17 and 2 is this number 1. Okay, so cells is the way we're going to be displaying numbers on the spreadsheet and also calling numbers from the spreadsheet. Another thing that I want to show you here is in programming, whatever's on the right is stored in whatever's on the left. So whatever the program does is it basically calculates this number and it stores in whatever's on the left. This is very, 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 very important, because whatever's we're going to calculate on this right is going to replace this. Now I'm using sum is equal to sum, which means whatever, for every single loop, whatever I calculate is always going to be updating the sum. So the sum initially is going to be 0 until it gets updated with all the sums of all these 10 numbers. So the best way to describe looping is let's actually see it in action. So for I is equal to 1 to 10, so initially we're going to say I is 1. So we're going to say sum is equal to sum. What is sum initially? Is 0 plus cells 17 plus 1, so 16 plus 1, so that's 17. So cells 17 and 2. So what is in 17 and 2? We have the number 1. So we have 0 plus 1. So now 0 plus 1 is stored in this sum. So we updated the sum from 0 to 1. So let's go with the second loop. The second loop is I is equal to 2. So sum is equal to, and this has 1 now, plus cells 16 plus 2, so 18 and 2. So 1 plus 2, which now we have the number 3. So now our sum is 3. Then we're going to go to I equal to 3. So sum is equal to 3 plus cells 16 plus 3. Okay, so now we have 19. So 19 and 2, what is in 19 and 2? Which is the number 3. So now we have 3 plus 3. So now our sum is 6. And we're going to keep looping like this. And the sum is going to be updated with each one of these numbers. So very, very simple code. And there's a reason why I'm actually introducing a sum code, because we're going to be using this code a lot. This is a common code that is very beneficial that you would know. So the next thing I want to do is I want to display this on the spreadsheet here. And the way I do this is through the concept that I explained. Whatever's on the right is stored in whatever's on the left. So I want to store this sum in this cell. So what is this cell? This cell is cells and this is 27 and 2. This is the address of this cell is equal to sum. And this is basically our code. So this is the first part of the code here. It sums all these 10. And the second part of the code here displays it here. So let's actually run our code. Run. We're going to run the sum. And see, we have a total of 55. So that's our sum. So the second thing I want to do is I want to validate whether or not the code summed this correctly. So I'm going to use Excel's inbuilt sum function. And it's just called sum. And I'm going to highlight all these numbers. And I'm going to press enter. And here, 55. Now, there's one thing here is actually saying that I have an error. And the reason it's saying I'm having an error is because it thinks that I forgot this number. But we didn't forget this number. This is the sum from the code. So I can just come here. And I can say ignore this error because it's not an error. So what did we learn in this lesson? We learned the 3 structures of programming. We learned the 2 types of repetition structures, the for next loop and the do while loop. We learned the difference between the 2 types. If you know the number of loops, you would use the for next. If you have a certain criteria that you need to meet, like we explained an error criteria, you would use the do while. We used the for next to write a simple sum code to sum 10 numbers and display it below the column. We used the cells keyword. And then we compared this simple function, simple sum function, with Excel's inbuilt function. Now in the next lesson, we're going to go to the next type of loop, which is the do while loop. So that's it for this lesson, and I'll see you in the next lesson.